All right, everyone. I made a video on why Brian Kelly should be fired. I made a video on the offense assistants buyouts. Then when Brian Kelly did get fired, I made a video on his buyout and what I think will happen there. And then the Governor Landry stuff happened. And I made a video on how he got so much control with LSU football. And now I guess the next thing to talk about is Scott Woodward and the truth and kind of timeline of his tenure. Because one of the interesting things that happens when coaches and administrators get fired is all the beat reporters can kind of air out the dirty laundry that they've been sitting on for all these years. So I've probably consumed, no joke, maybe 40, 50 hours of LSU content since Brian Kelly officially got fired, just because I knew this is what always happens when coaches get fired. Because, the reporters, they can't really say everything they hear, right? They don't want to give up their sources. They don't want to lose their access to practice in the press room. So I get it. But it is very interesting the things I've picked up and learned over the last week and a half from all the big LSU reporters and some stuff specifically about Scott Woodward that I heard on Jock Talk with Rufino last week that honestly kind of blew my mind and made me look at his tenure completely different. So I kind of wanted to make a video breaking down year by year, what really happened with Scott Woodward behind the scenes. I have no inside sources. I just listen to everybody's stuff. And I think, like other people, you can kind of pick up on when they're trying to say things without actually saying it because they don't want to get in trouble. And now they're pretty much just coming out and spilling the beans. And just going into this, I've said on other videos, like I've always been kind of, at least the last couple of months, up in the air on Scott Woodward. Didn't really feel one way or the other about if he stayed or stay or goes. But with what's come out, I'm kind of glad he's gone, and we'll get into it here in a second. It's just kind of the way, Landry went about it. But nevertheless, let's go year by year and analyze what Scott Woodward did with LSU. So first, I honestly kind of forgot this, is that Woodward was at University of Washington, before he went to A&M, and he made some big time hires there. But going back before that, everyone knows he's from Baton Rouge, went to Catholic, went to LSU, then he did some political stuff, and then he becomes the athletic director at University of Washington in the mid 2000s. I honestly forgot that his first hire he made, if you look back at it, they went winless in football the year before he got there and were operating at a huge deficit in their athletic program. And his first hire that he made was actually Steve Sarkisian, which I did not remember, which is pretty crazy. He was there for a couple years. Then Lane Kiffin leaves USC and Sarkisian steps into that role. At that point, Woodward goes out and hires Chris Peterson, which I also mentioned in my last video is like the biggest, most important hire they ever made in the history of their football program from Boise State. It was a pretty big pull at the time because you got to think around then that was like Statue of Liberty, Kellen Moore, Boise State. And obviously Chris Peterson stays there for a lot of years and is super successful. So that kind of sets the stage for Woodward, and this propels him into getting the A&M job. And, the thing with Woodward is his MO is always he's been a big game hunter. I think when you look at the totality of his athletic, whatever AD career, so to say, he goes for the name maybe more so than the fit. He's always going after the huge headline and trying to get that big pull away from another program where it's going to create some shock value. And look, that's partially the job of the AD is to get people excited, and he's always done that in one way or the other. Just maybe sometimes the fit, as we all know with Brian Kelly, it doesn't always work out. But some of the names he's pulled, maybe Chris Peterson wasn't shocking, but that was a big name at the time, and it worked out great for UW. Jimbo Fisher obviously was huge. Kim Mulkey, we'll get into the weeds of hers, but national championship at Baylor, bringing her to LSU, and then obviously Brian Kelly, like, even though when it initially happened, it was met with resistance initially, it was shocking that, Notre Dame's sitting head coach, without being fired, is leaving to take another job, especially LSU. So, that's his MO. I think he goes more so for the headline than what is the actual fit. But hey, you give it to him. He's well respected. He's made a lot of good moves. And with the Jimbo thing, I've said it before, you can't stick that buyout on him. He didn't give Jimbo the extension. So, I give him some credit there. But let's go year by year, Scott Woodward era at LSU. And I'm just going to stick to the main sports and the main hires. Oh, 2019, he gets hired, I think, in April or May. And he just walks in to the best team ever for football. Took over for Joe Oliva, which pretty universally was hated, it seemed like. And, he was the prodigal son coming home, obviously, like I said, grew up in BR, went to school at LSU, played the whole politics game in Louisiana. So he comes in and bang, immediately the greatest team of all time in college football. But the thing about it is, athletic directors are kind of like NFL GMs. The GM and the coach, they go together. The GM usually hires the coach. If the coach gets fired by the owner, usually the GM goes with it as well. So it has come out recently that maybe Woodward didn't always feel like Ogeron was his guy, and people in the Ogeron camp felt that Woodward kind of did unfairly. 2019, there's not much to talk about. It was the greatest season ever. Woodward didn't really have his hands on anything except he gave an extension, but I mean, he just won the national championship off of the back of the greatest season ever. You have to give him an extension. So I don't think that plays into too much of the storyline that we're going to get into, because I think the facts of 2020 and beyond, especially regarding Coach O, they kind of come to the forefront when you really play it through. So 2020, obviously COVID, disaster of a season at LSU. And the thing I really want to harp on is the Bo Pelini hire, because that is something I think to all of us that are diehard LSU fans never really made any sense. And just looking back, like LSU was the hottest brand in college football. We could have went out and got literally any young defensive coach we wanted. And we ended up with Bo Pelini. He was here in '07, but that was obviously a long time ago. And at the time, he's the head coach at Youngstown State FCS. And it just felt very strange. And I found the tweet when they announced Bo Pelini was coming back, and the comments are all like, what? Like, that's kind of weird. And, there's obviously people trying to convince themselves that, oh, it's just great to have you back, coach. But was a very strange hire. And on Jock Talk this past weekend, Jacques Doucet and Ruffino are kind of talking about how they've heard over the years behind the scenes that was really Woodward who kind of forced O to hire Pelini. And always one of the biggest indictments for me with Coach O was because the casual college football fan that I'm sure you all have talked to would be like, oh, how you should have got rid of Coach O. And one of the lines I would always use when I was explaining, I think bad things got at the end, where he didn't even interview Bo Pelini and his assistants coming off of the 2019 year, because he literally came out and said that he didn't even interview Bo Pelini. And I always took that as an indictment of like, oh my gosh, Coach O's life was so out of control, and he thought he could just, oh yeah, I'll just hire Pelini. But now they're saying that was really Scott Woodward's doing, and that the reason Coach O came out and said he didn't interview anyone is really because Woodward said, this is who you're hiring. Kind of a strange situation. Like, I guess at the time, at least for me personally, like, so riding so high off of 2019, LSU could do no wrong. So I don't even remember even being like that mad about Pelini. I just kind of trusted, like, hey, if this is who O and them want, then this is going to be great. Obviously, it's a disaster. He's fired after 1 year. Coach O and the whole like COVID thing kind of lost the team. Ryan Clark, I don't want to get into that. I think, Fehoko and other people have broken it down. But 2020, you go look at the back of that team, even with the opt-outs, so much talent on that team, and they so underperformed. But I give it a pass because I don't count the COVID year. Like, so many big-time players across the country didn't play. I remember the Arkansas game me and my friends went to in Fayetteville, and like the night before the game, no one knows if they're actually going to play because like LSU had so many guys with COVID. Just such a weird year, no fans in the stadiums. So I give it a pass. But I think where Woodward hamstringing really shows up is 2021. And when I heard Jock and Ruffino talk about kind of Woodward sticking Coach O with Pelini, it made me think back to something Preston Guy said after the Vanderbilt game this year. So after the Vanderbilt game, everyone but me is in the mentality that we can't afford to buy Kelly out. So he's obviously going to be back next year. So now you're thinking, what are we going to do on offense? And Preston Guy said something interesting. He was like, I wonder if they're going to do Woodward's going to do to Kelly what he did with O in 21. Same thing. We're coming now just one season off of 2019. And the best assistants we get are Durante Jones, who was like the DB's coach of the Vikings, and Jake Peets, who is just like this another dart throw analyst from the Saints, which is like the Joe Brady thing. And the way he kind of set it up was he basically made the comparison that like Woodward only gave O in 2021 like a very small amount of money to do anything. Kind of like he had already given up on him. And he was wondering, is he going to do that to Kelly next year? Like, what assistant, how much are we going to be willing to pay? So I went back because I do remember, and I always think one of the craziest rabbit holes with the whole Brian Kelly thing is Marcus Freeman was at Cincinnati as the D coordinator. He was the hottest DC in football. And I mean, I literally went back. Coach O came out at the press conference in 2021 and literally said that he was our top target. And what ends up happening is this media spin as well. Marcus Freeman, his family's more in the Midwest, and it just makes more sense for him to stay local to that area and go to Notre Dame as opposed to going to LSU. But looking back from what I hear now, it seems like Woodward really stuck O with these two shitty coordinators. Because if you look at them above their heads here, this is their salaries. Durante Jones, 1.45 million. Jake Peets, 1.2. Once again, we are one season removed from 2019 winning the national championship, and you're telling me these were the two best guys Coach Oak could have gone out and gotten. I mean, if you combine their salaries, I mean, it barely gets to what Marcus Freeman was at for Notre Dame to be just the DC. And also, we only gave Durante Jones and Jake Peets both 2-year deals. Think about how crazy that is in this era of college football. A place like LSU, a blue blood, only giving both of your coordinators a 2-year contract. And they're kind of like both were random dart throws, didn't make a lot of sense. Now, again, at the time, LSU can do no wrong. We're going to figure it out. You know, everyone was kind of on board. That's the Joe Brady offense we're getting with Peets and Durante Jones. He got the NFL experience. And, once again, 2021 was just as bad as 2020. I mean, watching some of those games back, it doesn't even feel like it was real, but it really does seem like Woodward meddled in the Coach O era because he wasn't his guy. Goes back, a criticism that people had of Woodward when he was at A&M is that he meddled with Jimbo and that staff too much. Now, I don't really know too much about the specifics of that, but that is something I have heard, and I think Ruffino mentioned this past week. So really is interesting how Woodward kind of screwed Coach O when you really go back and think about it. I mean, less than $3 million for both coordinators at LSU in 2021, a year removed from a national championship. It's kind of messed up. It's kind of messed up, and I honestly feel for O a little bit. Now, I don't know, maybe Woodward felt he needed to do this because of what O was acting like off the field, and that could be very well true and understandable. But as we get into this further, it kind of see he ends up doing the same thing with Kelly. So 2021 also was a good year for Woodward with making hires. He hires Kim Mulkey from Baylor and Jay Johnson from Arizona. There are a lot of people that will say Woodward was not the main guy involved in either of these hires. First, people usually like to give Stephanie Rempe, who is now the athletic director at Nevada, she kind of got lost in the shuffle of this whole Landry thing and like the cleaning out of the athletic department for whatever reason. She was, I think, the deputy athletic director for all these years. I know people like Scarborough really give her the credit for bringing in Mulkey. And, Mulkey, she had a lot of problems with Baylor at the time that she left in regards to where they were building their new stadium. I think some funding and other things. And her mom was, getting very old and coming back to Louisiana. Kind of was like the perfect storm, but LSU tried to get Mulkey over several years, and they actually pulled it off in 2021. Woodward's the sitting AD. You have to give him some credit, but most people attribute that signing to Stephanie Rempe. Now, maybe something that people don't talk about as much with the baseball thing, that I have a pretty good feeling that this is true, is that Woodward really wanted to go get Sullivan from Florida. Classic Woodward line of thinking, like, go get the big whale, the shock value. We're going to go steal Florida's coach that's been there forever. And eventually, the administration and the people around him convinced him no, which thank God, because Sullivan, I don't want to like harp on him too much. I know he's on like this mental health break. He's had like a lot of crazy stuff happen in his personal life over the last couple years, and it just seems really messy. And we got Jay Johnson, thank God. Whoever convinced Woodward not to go down this route, thank you so much. But it's interesting. Those are kind of the hires that people that are not critical of Woodward and are kind of mad that he did get fired. The people will say, well, he hired Kim Mulkey and Jay Johnson and some others. I'm just laying out what has been rumored and reported, that for those two, he wasn't really like the main guy that brought either of those ones in, especially in Jay Johnson's case. He did want to go a different route. And like, I know it's a rumor that he wanted Sullivan, but it fits the Woodward mold like so perfect. Like this, he's going to go poach Florida's coach who's got this big name. Like, I do believe it. But at the end of the day, he had to sign off on Jay Johnson. He had to sign off on Kim Mulkey, and he's definitely a part of all these. So I do give him credit there for both of those, at least a little bit. And also 2021, obviously the big one, Kelly, he got his white whale. I mean, think about, I mean, this coaching search is going to be crazy, but I mean, remember how crazy that one was. It was all Lincoln Riley was like the main one. There was like some Mel Tucker, some Bill O'Brien, some other names sprinkled in. But Brian Kelly was ever on the table. And he brings him in, and the idea is, hey, Brian Kelly will get the program back on track. He's at a place right now, or at least back then, the prevailing consensus was you can't get all the best athletes because of Notre Dame's like admission standards and stuff like that. So it's going to be like, hey, Brian Kelly, he's hungry for a championship. He's going to come here. He's going to fix the program. Only 30 whatever scholarship players. It's been harped on a million times, but he's going to come, bring the structure. He's a great coach, Hall of Fame coach, and he's going to get LSU back to the top. Obviously, hindsight 2020, but that's not how it went down. But in 2022, everyone was kissing Woodward's ass, saying that was a great hire. Beat Bama, probably the best sporting event I've ever been to. Everyone's calling him, Big Dick Kelly. I remember in this interview right here, he was emotional. Like he was tearing up about how much it meant to him. And the vibe was so different, man. We were all behind Brian Kelly. We made it to the SEC championship game. We lost to Georgia, but I mean, I was in the stadium. I don't think any of us really expected to actually win that game. Put up a good enough fight, honestly. That fucking field goal shit that happened derailed the game. We had all the momentum at that point. So anyway, very successful first season. I think we were all thinking, 6, 7 wins at that point. We go out, we win 10 games. The A&M loss was bad. I was also there for that game. Super disappointing. But just a fun season overall. Exceeded expectations. To beat Ole Miss when they were ranked really high. So at the time, it's looking great for Woodward. It's looking like he made a good hire, and the future of the program is looking up and up. When you overachieve that good in year one, you're thinking, how good is year two, year three going to be? But before I get into the rest, I just want to briefly mention McMahon because people like to shit on Woodward for hiring McMahon and firing Wade, but everyone's heard the rumor that basketball ended up being a sacrificial lamb for football because it is true. Football did have those NCAA violations around them too. And once we fired Will Wade, it's like they all went away. You never heard anything about that again. So I do kind of believe that rumor, but we hired McMahon. It is what it is. LSU basketball is not the job that LSU football, LSU baseball is. So you throw a dart at one of these mid-major coaches, and McMahon had a decent track record. And I still have some hope in McMahon this year. I'm one of the few, but I think they will exceed expectations this year. So you never know. Jury's kind of still out. And also never gave basketball the resources anyway, at least for men. So whatever. Moving on. Back to football. What we really care about. Now you're probably looking at this screen. You're like, what a array of people in this. But yes, 2023. Don't need to go over it too much. Like one of the most bittersweet, frustrating years of watching any team ever. See Jaden Daniels win the Heisman. After 2019, we've all thought we'll never see an offense like that again, but we really did. I mean, the offense with Jaden Daniels, Brian Thomas, Malik Neighbors was so electric, Mason Taylor, and it was such a fun offense. But every time the offense scored, the defense would just do something even worse. Matt House, like the players obviously weren't bought in. The famous thing was Mekhi Wingo kick rocks video that Malik also reposted when Brian Kelly got fired. But you're probably thinking, what is Duncanville Colin Simmons doing here? He went to Texas. Well, this is another thing that Rufino has been saying as of the last week is that I think we'll all remember that LSU kind of was a little later than some of these other programs to adopt the NIL and paying the high price for portal and high school guys. And we all know, because it's super frustrating, that there was a time when we had like DeCorian Moore committed, Bryce Underwood committed, Colin Simmons also was like LSU's my dream school. Rufino's kind of come out and say that LSU was in all these battles with other schools like Texas and Oregon for DeCorian Moore and Colin Simmons, and that when Kelly went to Woodward, that Woodward was really the one that was like, no, we're not playing this game. We're not going to pay this much for one kid. And that's why they ended up going to Texas and Oregon and Michigan is because the money didn't match. And that was pretty surprising to hear. But I mean, it makes sense because all these guys, all they would say is that LSU, oh, that's my dream school. Like I grew up my favorite team and all these things. And at the end of the day, they go to other programs and it's always reported that it's for more money. But I think we all assumed it was really Brian Kelly. That was the one that's like, oh, we're not going to do this. But at the end of the day, it's being reported that it was Woodward. That was really the one like, no, we're not going to shell out the money for this, which leads into 2024 where Once again, a lot of changes. Like, right, you fire Matt House, you fire pretty much all the defensive staff. I think what ends up happening is a situation where you bring Brian Kelly in. His entire first staff that he brought in outside of Denbrock was like complete whiff. I'm talking about Polian. I'm talking about all these other position coaches, Matt House, I can't Steeples, some of these guys. And honestly, I'm trying to remember the name of our D line coach that ended up going to the Broncos. He was like the one good position coach, and Matt House pushed him out. But story for another day. So what ends up happening is, and I know this isn't a rumor, this is fact because all the LSU reporters are saying it now, and Josh Pate has even said it, that the hires of Blake Baker and Corey Raymond and all these guys was not Brian Kelly. That was not Brian Kelly's choice. That was Scott Woodward. That was the LSU administration decision, which means it's Scott Woodward. So you have a situation where now you're once again meddling and telling the coach who he needs to hire. And, that's not a great situation. But at the end of the day, can you blame Woodward? Because Brian Kelly whiffed so bad on his initial staff. And then the one good guy he had, this is obviously the year where they try to promote Joe Sloan to co-offensive coordinator, for some reason to be good for Bryce Underwood. I never really understood that line of thinking. And it pisses off Denbrock so much that he leaves. Rightfully so. I mean, he just had a number one offense in the country and Heisman Trophy winning quarterback, and now you want to promote this guy that doesn't call plays. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And then you're probably looking like, what's this OU dude doing on my screen? Well, remember, this is Dominic Williams. So remember going into 2024, the number one most glaring need that everyone and their mama knew LSU had was the interior D-line. We had nobody. And Dominic Williams from TCU was one of the top guys, and we didn't get him. And it was reported that we didn't get him because I think it was like, oh, you ended up paying like 600, 700 grand for him, and we weren't willing to do that. We didn't think he was that quality of a player. And I think there was someone else like Barron or someone else that maybe went to Miami, same type of deal that we didn't end up paying. And we ended up getting Gio Piaz. And the D line throughout the year ended up being a huge problem. But this is just another situation where Scott Woodward didn't want to shell out the money, if you want to believe that line of thinking that it was really him, which I do. Scott Woodward didn't want to pay the money for the NIL, which leads into 2025. And, 2024 goes the way that it does. Another frustrating year of not making the playoffs, but goes into 2025, which obviously this year's been fucking crazy. They do start going in all in on NIL. BK does the $1 million match. They raise a bunch of money from the fans. BK gives $1 million. They raise a bunch of money from private donors. They finally accept that they need to go out and build out a roster. And I think Woodward probably just saw the writing on the wall. With these ADs, it all comes down to the football hire because football is the huge moneymaker. And he probably knew the buyout that Brian Kelly had probably wasn't going to fare well for him. So there is an acceptance that, all right, we got to go all in this year. And they did. I mean, we cleaned up in the portal. We got everyone we wanted, basically. And then obviously the season starts. We beat Clemson. At the time, we're thinking that they're like national championship type team. And we go in their house and beat them. So we think we're amazing. And then ever since that game, the La Tech game, just a weird game. Like, it's like, okay. And then Florida, we have 5 picks. One of them goes for a pick six, a touchdown, and we only win 20-10. And now it's the infamous moment of the first question I'll ask them, what's the deal with the run game and the offense? And BK calls everyone spoiled. That was a really bad look. Vanderbilt happens. We lose that. I've said no matter when Brian Kelly got fired after that the Vanderbilt game was like the spiritual death because you just kind of knew if you couldn't beat Vanderbilt with the remaining schedule, you weren't going to make the playoffs. And then obviously the embarrassment that was this A&M game a couple weeks ago. And then you thought the embarrassment stopped there. Landry gets involved. He apparently goes above Woodward, goes around and calls a meeting with the Board of Supervisors to his governor's mansion, raises the money to get Brian Kelly fired without Woodward being involved at all. And then he does this political press conference last week. And, I know he fucking planted Glenn Guillebeau to ask that question about if Scott Woodward would be involved in the decision-making process. And now what will live in LSU lore forever, Landry goes on that rant about Woodward in the contract, and it's very obvious that he will not be involved in any way. I mean, he literally just flat out said that. And then at that point, everyone pretty much assumed that Woodward's gone. It's only a matter of time. Maybe thought it would go on a little bit longer, but as of a few days ago, it is official that Woodward and LSU officially agreed to part ways. Not sure why we're paying the $6 million buyout for him if we part ways, but I think we all really know what that means. So just kind of an insane time in LSU. And like I said earlier, it's very interesting to hear everything that has come out about the whole Woodward tenure and the Brian Kelly tenure, and how, Woodward maybe meddled more than we wanted to admit. You know, I believe most of these rumors that I said. Obviously, I want to make a video on it, but if it all is true, like I think it is, I think Woodward 100% deserves to go. Especially, I can't get over what he did to Coach O, man. Now, if he did it, like I said, because he felt the need to hamstring him because of all the off the field stuff that maybe was happening with Coach O, I don't know. But if he did it just because it wasn't his guy and Woodward wanted to make his mark and make his hire on the program, that's a pretty messed up thing to do. But I just kind of want to lay it out for everyone. Those are the rumors. That's kind of the timeline of the rumors. Interesting to see what you guys think in the comments. Would you have let Scott Woodward go? Do you believe any of these rumors, or do you think I'm full of shit and everyone is full of shit? So I don't know. Let me know, but I'll see you guys in the next one.